All right, so please join me in welcoming Representative Ness.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's so good to see so many of you, friendly faces. Glad to be here and so happy. Thank you to Greg Alexander for really reaching out to us to set this up. I'm glad that I'm so happy to be able to bring this legislation to the district. I'm excited about what the future looks like here in Illinois. And I'm not going to say too much because we have a specialist from the Illinois Environmental Council, Eliot Clay, with us today. And we'll get to the question and answers in a minute. But just want to say thank you for being here. And thanks to Greg for setting this up. We were happy to do it.
Thank you, Rep. Ness. So yeah, please join me in welcoming Eliot Clay. Like Representative Ness said, he is with the Illinois Environmental Council. And I just want to give you a little bit of a background on Eliot. So Eliot serves as the State Programs Director for the IEC, and he previously served as the Agriculture and Water Programs Director, providing support and guidance for IEC's sustainable agriculture priorities and legislative agenda. Eliot is dedicated to ensuring that agriculture, our state's largest source of revenue, is not depleting our natural resources and negatively impacting our environment. Prior to his work with IEC, Eliot was a staff member of the Illinois Senate Republican Caucus for nearly 4 years, providing assistance as a legislative analyst and for the Environment and Conservation Committee and the Agriculture Committee. He also served as a graduate assistant with the Illinois Issues magazine and the Springfield-based NPR station. Eliot earned his undergrad degree at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville in political science and English lit, and then went on to obtain a master's degree in public administration at the University of Illinois Springfield. So a huge thank you to Eliot for being here as our subject matter expert. And again, an additional thank you to the McHenry County Environmental Defenders for partnering with us for this event. We're grateful for the work that the Environmental Defenders and IEC does for McHenry County and the entire state of Illinois. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Eliot. Just give me 1 second because I got to share. I got to make him the host.
No worries. Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you to the defenders of McHenry County. Really appreciate you all thinking of us and talking with us. And thank you so much, Representative Ness, for thinking of us as well. Like, I think this is a really cool opportunity. Obviously, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one, but there was a big bill that passed this year, right? That really revamped, the energy portfolio in Illinois and where we want to go as a state, and affirming the fact that, our state, not just the environmentalists in it, but also the government itself is dedicated to moving Illinois towards a clean energy future. And we're really excited. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, which we can get into in a little bit. But the really big haul of getting this thing over the finish line in the legislature, thanks to representatives like Representative Ness and representatives and senators across the aisle, so very, very happy about that. With that, I will go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to give a very brief presentation on kind of what was in the Clean and Equitable Jobs Act. I know a lot of folks already are well aware of it on this call, so I'm going to try to make it as brief as possible and not bore you to death with some stuff you might have already been well aware of. But with that, I will go ahead and share my screen in a second. Give me just 1 second. Okay, cool. Here we go. I'm going to present mode, if I can figure it out. Actually, you know what? We can just stick like this. This is totally cool. Okay, cool. So I'll just give a brief overview of IEC, kind of our logo. And this is a fun picture of us. We were all in a Voyager canoe out at a really cool natural area that's just like west of Springfield that we got all of our staff to go to. IEC brings together the Illinois environmental community to influence decision makers and ensure clean air, clean water, and healthy communities. That's kind of like our bread and butter. That's what we do. We were founded in 1975. We represent over 90 different environmental organizations throughout the state, including a lot of community-based environmental justice organizations. And we have a bunch of individual members as well. And you can see all the different things that we cover: clean water, energy, air, open space, sustainable ag, like all the really nitty gritty of all the different subject matters we need to talk about when we holistically talk about environmental concerns in Illinois and throughout the rest of the world. And this quote this was kind of referring to the UN climate report from a few years ago, that, you know, the report really was going to really be a wake-up call to the world that something needed to happen quickly. I think everybody is pretty well aware of that. We need to really start making some very strong pushes to cleaning up our, you know, energy portfolio throughout the world in order to make a really meaningful dent in lowering the Earth's temperature and stopping that from occurring. Illinois is a very, very important piece of that, right? We are one of the biggest carbon dioxide emitters in the country. In this graph, like, we're number 6. It's always a toss up between us and maybe a couple other states in that category, but being in the top 5 is something we've done multiple times. So Illinois in and of itself is going to be a big player in where the United States as a country is going to go in this. So being cognizant of that, you know, we looked at a lot of different things. Greenhouse gas emissions by sector have declined a little bit over the years, but overall it's still much too high as it's been to get us to a place where we need to be. And in the thinking of this, we're trying to come up with all this legislation, and out of that came the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, which I'm sure some of you are members of. This was really a group of everybody from faith-based organizations, environmental organizations, community groups, to advocate for a piece of legislation that was going to get us to where we needed to be. And our big tenets were, you know, no climate plan, no equity, no deal. Like, those things had to be in tandem with one another in order to get something over the line that we could agree with. And that's where we come with the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, aka CEJA, which you may hear me use that phrase occasionally in this. But in the bare bones, again, don't want to preach the choir too much, we're going to get 100% renewable energy by 2050, and we put benchmarks in there of reaching 40% by 2030 and 50% by 2040. This gives enough time for these, you know, the big fossil fuel emitters in the state to get to a point where they can convert, or, you know, and we can get, you know, workforce trained up to get into these new clean energy industries and all of that kind of good stuff.
Eliot, can you go into presentation mode?
Oh,
maybe,
yeah.
like, maybe under view, is that?
Oh, yeah, it's under view.
Yeah.
You see, I've never, oh, you're right. There we go.
Thanks.
Cool. All right, there we go. Thank you. Sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the chat too when I do this. So if I miss something, just please shout at me. But yeah, so putting Illinois in a path to 100% renewable energy, carbon-free energy by 2045, addressing the solar cliff, which was a really big, scary thing. We passed the Future Energy Jobs Act a few years ago that provided money for solar installation. And we had hit a point where that money was going to run out, and it did for a long time. It prevented a lot of projects from happening. But now that this act is passed, that is back in business, which is very, very cool. And then creates, you know, a lot of new projects, you know, for schools, community-driven solar, renewable energy projects, specifically for the communities that have been worst impacted by climate change and just, you know, pollution and all of those really terrible things. In terms of, let's see where we're at. Yeah, we are, I mean, there's a lot of states that have tried to take on the task of cleaning up their energy sector. Illinois is arguably the most comprehensive and equitable one in the country. And I think there's an argument to be made that it is the most equitable for sure. We're really cognizant of the fact that, you know, with the shutting down of power plants and stuff like that, there's going to be a lot of workers that are going to have their jobs jeopardized. And we don't necessarily want that, right? We want to be able to say, you know, you guys aren't the bad guys. You're the ones that were working in these places, and we want to provide an outlet for you to get a new job in this emerging, you know, clean energy future for the state. So it provides incentives for a lot of this stuff for existing fossil fuel plants to, you know, convert their facilities over, and things for displaced workers and all that kind of good stuff. Workplace equity, just briefly, this creates work hubs across Illinois to provide training and the expertise needed to get these folks into these new kind of careers. $35 million per year for business development grants and low cost incentive capital, which is really important, especially for low income communities and those kind of things. A lot of utility accountability. I mean, we want to make sure that the distributors of our energy throughout the state are going to be, at least not preventing us from really getting to the goals that we need to, and create, especially among, all the corruption things that have happened within Illinois, and making sure that these folks are actually serving, their constituents and not some kind of other interest. And also a chunk of this clean transportation, but I can talk more about this. The clean transportation part is not as big as we would have originally liked. We were really hoping that there was going to be a component of this that was going to, transition the state as a whole away from gasoline powered vehicles and diesel and those kind of things. And we're getting there, but we need to do a little bit more work on it. So this bill really focused primarily on the energy sector itself, but there were some cool things with transportation in regards to ComEd and Ameren in requiring beneficial electrification plans for their facilities and for their vehicles that they use, which is definitely a step in the right direction. And then, the electric vehicle coordinator position at IEPA is going to be important. We actually just passed a bill during veto session a few weeks ago that created a really big electric vehicle manufacturing incentive, tax incentive program in Illinois. And with the installment of this position at EPA, it's going to put the agency in a good position to be able to administer money and to, set up future legislation regarding getting requirements for vehicles on the roads, especially in the commercial sector. I believe that actually might be it. Yep, I hit the end of it. That was maybe a record time. Let me stop sharing really quick. Yeah. Oh, there we go. I don't know what happened there. But that is where we're at right now. We're obviously at a stage where this very, very large piece of legislation has just been passed, but now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of working with the agencies to admit or administer the administrative rules and make sure that we're in a good place moving forward, that this gets enacted in the way that it was intended when it was passed. With that, I think that we really wanted to use this time to open it up to questions from folks. I think you're all pretty knowledgeable of a lot of this bill and what it did, but there's questions about, where we're going and stuff, which I think is a really big, purpose of this lunch and learn session. So I think we can open it up for questions now, Hannah or Representative Ness, however you'd like to proceed.
I've answered a few questions in the chat already as I saw them coming in. Bob asked about the solar, in the previous bill, we had incentives for solar, and that has been expanded significantly. Not just for individuals, but they've included projects. So communities can create co-ops now. That's one possibility. And it just gives more incentives it broadens the scope of that. And it increased it 5 times by the amount of money that was in there. So that was one. And then I just saw, when does the rebate for the electric vehicles begin? Do you know that, Eliot?
That is a really good question. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I can figure it out. So there was definitely some debate in the House and Senate when this went through about the rebate incentives for electric vehicles, especially I think it's in Cook and the Collier counties is primarily where it's at. Downstate has not been included in that yet, but I certainly hope, being a downstate resident, that there are some counties that actually want to sign on to this, but we'll see. It could be kind of a long shot, at least for the time being. But I can get you an answer to that. And just as a heads up to anybody here, if there's any specific dates or numbers or anything that I don't know off the top of my head, I can definitely get that info to Representative Ness's office and have it distributed out, so everybody can kind of see the answers on that. So let me see what the other questions we're getting are. Can a community-driven solar organization start its own solar farm? I believe under this bill, yes. I mean, they would be, I think there's some local zoning requirements and those kind of things that have already been built out in, I think, a solar bill of rights that was passed a couple of years ago. But yes, I think that would be part of this. If there was a project that they would consider a solar farm, I think they could do that under this bill. How much collaboration is there with the large environmental groups in the state, NRDC, ELPC? Would think they would have some great input and move forward. Yes. So right now, groups like NRDC, like the Natural Resources Defense Council, Environmental Law and Policy Center, Sierra Club, we've got some IEC folks working on this that are very involved in the administrative rule process and are working directly with the agencies in writing the rules that will basically implement this law. So they're very heavily involved. The folks that had championed this bill and wrote and helped write and advocate for it are the same ones that are at the table helping it get implemented. So we're really trying to make sure that there's not going to be some kind of gap in the process. Let's see. There's lots of questions coming in. That's awesome. Oh yeah. Okay. This is the second mention I've seen. Build Back Better passed this morning, which is really, really cool. We're very excited about it. I watched it way too late last night and then realized it was not going to pass because of the fun little filibuster that Leader McCarthy was doing. But yeah, so it said passes. Can I get incentives for both state and feds? I believe so. There's $550 billion in the Build Back Better Act directly related to climate change. And I believe within that, there's a tax credit incentives for EVs. So you could potentially double up in Illinois, depending on where you live at, to get credits from both the federal and state governments in this, which is definitely a really great opportunity for somebody, especially if they're a first-time buyer of an EV. You know, it helps them get in, which is very, very cool. Let's see what else we got.
Eliot, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah,
we
of
also,
course.
over the veto session, we passed a tax incentive electric vehicle renewable energy sector bill that will incentivize companies that are in this industry. So charging facility companies that make components for renewable energy. There is a big push to increase charging stations. I think I read somewhere that in order for Illinois to really do this to the scale we want, we need something like 40,000 charging stations across the state. Does that sound right, Eliot? So
yeah.
I think the initial rollout of the incentives, I've seen a lot about electric vehicles in there, is going to be related to charging stations and where we are able to put those. So, but that bill we passed in veto really complements this bill here to move some of that forward.
Yeah, no, that's a
federal government.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That bill that we passed during veto is really going to be an incentive for electric vehicle manufacturers to come to Illinois. Because we've already got companies like Rivian and Bloomington that are doing really, really cool stuff. I mean, this electric truck thing, I want to drive up there and get one like right now, but I'll have to wait a little bit. But companies like that, and then there's also talks of companies like Samsung coming into the same area and building, battery plants for these vehicles as well. And we've even did an amendment right at the last minute that's going to include electric motorcycles in that as well, which definitely pleased a lot of people. So it's definitely a cool thing that goes in the same direction we're going with all of this. Let's see. Is there a time limit on how long the $4,000 rebate of purchasing an electric car will be available? At this point, I don't think it's as much of a time limit as much as it is the amount of money that is in the fund. So I think that, the credits are available until they're exhausted, and then there needs to be talk in the legislature about reappropriating more money for those funds, and those kind of things. But I do understand, I believe that the credits for EVs in Chicago and the collar counties are basically paid into by a tax that is paid locally up there. So as long as that revenue keeps coming, the fund should still kind of exist. I might be able to get you some more specific info on that, but we'll see. And then, is there money in the federal infrastructure bill to help with EV charging stations? I believe that there is. I would need to talk to we've got a staff person we just hired to work specifically on federal policy. And if anybody is, I'll say this just to be simple, that bill is very confusing to get through all the way. It's really good to have those people that can synthesize it down. So we're looking at that right now, and I can get some more info. But I mean, one cool thing that we talked about, and Representative Ness sort of mentioned, in order to really scale up, the purchasing and use of EVs, there needs to be these charging stations everywhere. And right now there's just not enough of them. But one cool thing I was learning about recently is like light poles that you see in like parking lots and those kind of things. those run on the exact same, like the wires that are needed for EV charging in the first place. So there are really cool ideas happening right now about converting existing infrastructure and making it so it can actually charge a vehicle. And it's going to save a lot of money in the end. You don't have to build an entire station to do this. You could literally be in your parking lot, of your grocery store. And when you walk in, you could plug it in right at the light pole that you park underneath, which is definitely a really cool way of going about this. And people are getting really innovative, which is fun to see. I feel like every day there's like something new coming out of this. That's really cool.
There's also rebates for charging infrastructure. So I think that'll be looking more at some of the municipality level and incentivizing other, entities that do these building projects to include the infrastructure for electric vehicles. And so that there's some rebates for that as well. So we'll see how that works. I have a star by that to learn more about it. So I see we have a trustee on the call with us, Mr. Glogowski from Algonquin. So I can find out more about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there's anybody on here, and I'm sure that there are, that are better experts in these particular areas than I am, please feel free to shout out something, because I'm always here to learn more. Let's see. And I saw it was a comment from Bob. It said, one of the big limiting factors of EVs today is people that live in apartments or condos and can't have home charging. Remote paid charging is much more expensive than overnight home charging. Is there something to help with those EVs? And I believe so. I think some of the rebates for the charging stations have actually been expanded to include expansion of those kind of facilities at like apartment complexes, which originally was not in there, but I think it was negotiated in. I'll double check that, but that is going to be an option, I believe, moving forward for especially new constructions of apartments and those kind of things. Let's keep scrolling down for a second. So Nancy, environmental defenders have a Solar for All project that has already made it through the first drawing this fall. Very, very cool. But more funding is needed to all the projects to move forward. When will the new funding become available? That is a great question. This is one of those things where we get into interesting conversations about like the treasurer's office and the comptroller and the transferring of money and all those kind of fun things. The short answer is I'm not entirely sure, but I can say that it will be before too long. I think this was a big enough priority from the governor's office and from a lot of people within the legislature that they're going to try to expedite the distribution of this money to make sure that it gets out timely, because people were very excited about it. And as I said, this was a big thing of the governor. He just got done, I'm sure a lot of you got done talking in England at the COP26 summit about this particular bill, which is really, really cool that we're kind of on the world stage with this. But yeah, hopefully we'll get that money out soon. We'll definitely keep everybody posted. Then I heard that all Kohl's in Illinois will not have charging stations. I'm not aware of that, but that's cool. I'm definitely a root for it. I feel like I'm based down in Springfield, and there's a lot of stores in the local area that I've noticed that have started putting charging in. Not even like new constructions either. It's like old, supermarkets and those kind of things that are starting to convert, which I think is a good sign. We're moving in the right direction, right? Let me see. Bob said Walgreens also supposed to have charging stations in all their stores. That's super, super cool. We'll definitely look forward to that. And then from John, Pace states that it is not going into EV due to the uncertainty surrounding the charging stations. Can Pace tap into funds made available during the veto session? I believe that conversation is still ongoing. The situation with Pace and the transportation kind of groups in Chicago has been somewhat complicated, because I believe that they put out their sort of their budget narrative for the next couple of years, and it did not include really any language about electrifying their vehicle fleet. And I think that there has been a significant amount of pushback on those groups because of that statement that was put out. And I think there's some conversations going on between the city and Pace and some other folks, and including the governor's office and some legislators on that. So I don't have specifics on that yet, but I would say keep an eye out, because there's going to be some news coming down the pipe before too long. I live in Huntley. What incentives does CEJA give to Huntley for EV charging stations? First of all, let me ask, what county is Huntley in? Because I do not know off the top
In
of my
two
head.
counties, Kane
Okay.
and McHenry.
Okay, yeah. I believe McHenry is covered in there. So those EV tax credits would be available to you in Huntley, which is definitely very cool. Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Let's see. Bob, thank you for answering some questions on Algonquin. Keep putting that stuff in there. And then Jan said, what's the environmental impact of charging stations other than using existing light poles? Generally charging stations are not like, they don't take up a lot of physical space, right? It's really just a way, you see the Tesla ones, they're just big fancy outlets basically. So they don't take up a lot of physical space. And some of it's just like concrete and a little bit of rebar, those kind of things. Really the environmental impact is, you got to start asking, like, where is the energy coming from that is helping charge that vehicle? And right now, a lot of it's fossil fuels, but with the passing of CEJA, we're going to transfer to a point where those charging stations are going to be completely carbon neutral. They're going to be drawing energy from renewable sources, and it's not going to really have that much of an impact on the environment at all, which is very, very cool. Why can't Pace install L3 chargers in their bus depot? That is a good question that I'm not sure the answer to, but we'll flag that. I'm sure, Hannah, are we going to be like saving this chat and all that stuff? That would be awesome. We can look into some of this. And then Lisa, maybe there's another question for Hannah. Will the recording of this session be sent after the meeting?
Yes, so I put it in the chat, but for those who didn't see it, this will be recorded and shared with everyone on the call who registered, as well as on our website and shared with the environmental defenders. So it should be accessible, but if for whatever reason you have a hard time accessing it, just let our office know and I can share it with you again.
Yep. And also, just as a flag, when we get off here, I will share my email address in the chat. So if anybody has follow-up questions or just wants to give a shout out or anything, definitely feel free to. Let's go down to Royal. Has the legislature considered a requirement that all new commercial real estate construction includes charging stations, or a guideline for required percentage of parking spots for charging stations? That is a good question. I know that was part of the CEJA discussions originally, and requiring that new commercial construction and I think residential too, at least for apartment complexes and those kind of things, would have charging stations in them. Representative Ness, I don't know if you know that off the top of your head or not.
I actually wrote down that comment because I think something else that's going to happen now that this bill has passed is there's going to be like components that will be driven through legislation. Like there will be ongoing like trailer bills to, adjust or amend some of the changes, just as, we've talked about in here. There's things that, because it was so large, that maybe got overlooked. Or for example, the Solar for All, when they did that program initially, they didn't expect the kind of response that they got, which is why it ran out of money. Like within months, they ran out of money. So I think as these things continue to move forward, we'll have a better understanding of what legislation is necessary to do that. One bill that did pass, though, there was a caveat that restricted solar. It had to do with the height of a building. And so like some communities were restricting it because of that. They were using that. And we passed a bill in the spring that raises that height so that more solar could be put on more structures. So I know that was one. It wasn't a part of this bill, but it was, something separate. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great general flag for big pieces of legislation like this in general. I mean, it's one of those like best laid schemes of mice and men situation, right? Like we've had like a lot of really great ideas in that, but getting every little tidbit in there and making sure that it's gonna all go off without a hitch is difficult. We got to see kind of what problems arise and other things that we didn't address. So I'd say, there's going to be, as Representative Ness said, there's going to be trailer bills on this. There's going to be things that improve the implementation of this act and maybe include new ideas that we hadn't even considered initially. And it'll be like an evolving process. So I think that's a cool thing. Just because this passed doesn't mean it's the end all be all. We've got some work to do and some things that we're really going to improve too, which is really
well, there was a lot of talk about, I remember some of the discussions, haven't we looked into, there was a big concern about setting a deadline to the decarbonization. That was one of the number one fears. And there was a lot of speculation about, well, if we do this and then we can't meet it, or what's it going to mean? And something that, was brought up is there's technology emerging that we don't even know is possible yet. Some of the work that they're doing with decarbonization and sequestration, and there were some other technologies. So we said, but let's not let that stop us, right? Let's do the bill, let's put in the deadlines, let's give ourselves this goal. And then as these things come along, if we need to make changes and adjust, we can. But to even have it out there and to say it, I think it unleashes a lot of possibilities and creativity, as I think we've even heard on this call briefly. So hopefully that will happen, and we'll be able to do more of that and move some things forward even more quickly, I hope.
Yeah, that's great. Let me see what else we've got in the chat really quick. Is there any differentiation in the creation of charging stations for local and long distance needs? That is a really, really great question. I can look into that because I know that that's been sort of a topic for a few different folks that I've at least heard of. But let me look into that and we'll get back to you. I
saw a Tesla with Florida plates, and I so badly wanted to, it was in a parking lot. I wanted to go up to the driver and say, how'd you get here? I just want to know, did you have a special route that you took? And
I did see a fun app online that I think you can look at, where if you plot in a point A and a point B, it will basically be here's the charging stations you would need to hit along the way. And I think it would even tell you, in this particular instance, you're not going to make it.
Yeah, I don't know if it may be just an app, but I thought Tesla had something along those lines. That kind of lets you know how far you can go and where charging stations are.
Yeah, I think the cool thing, at least what Tesla has said in a lot of the other charging stations, that I think at this point that there are enough stations that you could pretty much get anywhere at this point. There's not really a lot of gaps, unless you're talking some extremely rural areas of the United States, but we're getting there. Oh, Gigi, did you have a?
I was just going to add to that, and that Google has an opportunity for you to plug in where are electric charging stations, and it'll map that out. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Tesla one. A lot of the plazas or oasis on I-80 heading east, even as Nancy said, also going west, they have charging stations there, but if your car doesn't have, if the EVs don't have a range of farther than 260 to 300 miles, you're sitting there for 2 or 3 hours while your car recharges to then move on to your next charging station. So as people we know are impatient with wanting to get on the move and do their lives and get commerce where it needs to go, those would be something that I think would be beneficial to look into, that expeditious charging opportunity for even those places along the interstates.
Yeah, that's a great flag. Thank you. And that actually kind of reminds me too, I was at I think it was a Wally's gas station that's on the way up on 55 between here and Chicago. That has the largest charging station I have seen to date. It is pretty impressive to see right up the highway. I think we're going to start seeing lots more of that coming down the pike. Bob asked a really good question. Is there any relief for people in homeowners associations that restrict solar? This has been an ongoing issue, and one that Representative Ness brought up briefly with the bill that passed that allowed, the differentiation on height restrictions when you put solar on a home. The bottom line is homeowners associations and municipalities have had a hard time reckoning with some of this. And a lot of it is because of aesthetic, problems, right? Some people just don't like the looks of things, and they get worried about, different zoning issues and all that kind of stuff. But I'll say this, one bill that has been floating around the legislature for a little bit that I believe is sponsored by Representative Diddick is a solar bill of rights that would basically put into statute that municipalities and homeowners associations and the like cannot crack down on solar just because of the way it looks or aesthetic issues. I think they want to take into account that, the amount of ground coverage of these units and those kind of things should be taken into effect. We obviously don't want to create a situation where an installation of a solar panel on somebody's property negatively impacted somebody else's physically impacted somebody else's home next door. But we do want to make sure that the municipalities are not just outright not allowing this just because they don't want it. There has to be legitimate reasons for it. So I would say this is one of these things that we're gonna need continued support on from constituents, to contact their elected officials and say, especially if there is a really marked issue in your community, to say like this, this should not be allowed. We should be able to do this on our own properties and generate our own electricity. It's funny, I actually talked to a lot of Republicans and stuff about this issue as well. And this is one of those ones where they tend to agree with us that it's a property rights issue and people should be able to do this. So there is some kind of bipartisan support for this idea in some ways. But that's a fight we're gonna have to keep making. That's definitely a good flag, Bob. How does this legislation help homeowners put solar on their homes? So the Solar for All program that was mentioned is really a good stepping stone, and I can put a link for that in the chat. I can provide a little bit more detailed info on this. But there's parts in the law that really provide, tax incentives for putting this on your home and help reduce the cost of installation and for buying the equipment and all that kind of fun stuff. We can get you some more specific info on that can lay out, the kind of benefits that you can get depending on the size of the, what you're trying to do and all that kind of good stuff.
I did talk to somebody from ComEd yesterday, and they were sharing that requests for solar hookups, I think just in our district alone, they measure how many they get, and they're expecting an uptick of that. So ComEd is getting ready also, I think, in seeing that more people will be moving forward with that. So
yeah, that's great. And actually here in Springfield too, I've actually got people right outside my window right now that are upgrading all the electrical lines in Springfield. And I think part of that is they're starting to notice an influx of, solar projects and those kind of things. And they're trying to get the power grid down here ready to be able to accept those new installations as they come online, which is pretty cool. Minus all the noise that it's been making and scaring my dog for the last 3 weeks. Let's see what else we got in here. Okay, I think that might be the end of the questions I'm at least seeing in the chat.
No, not really. This is Jerry. I have a question for both Susan and Eliot. In regards to, we had a meeting, the Lions Club here in Algonquin, and many of our members are not young and they are retired. And many retirees don't have the income of a person that may make over 100 grand a year. So how do you explain to these individuals to buy an electric vehicle when a Tesla costs like 55, 60,000? The new pickup trucks coming out of GM or Toyota are like about a $85,000 to $90,000, and you only have a $4,000 incentive. That's not going to work.
that's true.
So, I mean, how do you explain to retirees that go ahead and buy an electric car when they can't really afford it?
Yeah,
Great question.
yeah. I mean, that's a really valid concern, and obviously, we're at a point now where electric vehicles, right, are sort of an emerging industry and technology, and with that, prices are somewhat high, especially for the vehicle side of it. And in recognizing that, I think that's why our state has done something like institute this EV manufacturing tax credit to get those built in Illinois. Because the bottom line is, the more of these that we get on the road and the more infrastructure there is, the prices are going to drop for these vehicles. Having said that, the incentives that are going to be in place from both CEJA and from the federal government are going to be able, I think, probably the most they've ever been to supplement the cost of buying these vehicles. I actually saw an article recently about Ford's new electric F-150. That's been a big deal. That was announced a few months ago. And I believe that you could actually purchase a base model with the incentives. And I think that the cost would be $45,000, which for a brand new electric pickup truck is a hell of a bargain considering the normal price of just like a gasoline one. So I think we're getting there is the bottom line. And it's unfortunate that the prices are not where we want them to be. But in recognizing that, this is the first stage of a process where the prices will drop, but it's going to take a little bit of time.
Okay, Elliot, and the last question I have is the lithium batteries. I've heard rumors that they don't last to 10 years as they're warranted for. You only get 6 to 7 years out of them. But how would I know that? That's what just people are saying. And I don't know if it's true or false, but how do you dispose of the lithium batteries? What's the process?
No, and that's a really, really great question. And that's something we've actually grappled with a little bit as an environmental community, right? Because lithium is something that needs to be mined out of the ground. And along with a lot of other, technologies, especially related to EV, like cars and those kind of things, a lot of that stuff is made out of like rare earth metals that are in very little supply. A lot of the times they're mined unsustainably. And we would grapple too with, like you said, what do we do with lithium batteries when we're done with them? How do we recycle them properly? I do think, those are questions that we're trying to come to terms with right now. But the EV manufacturing credit bill that we passed, like Samsung, those same companies aren't just manufacturing these batteries. They're trying to figure out beneficial reuse for the parts inside of them to ensure, one, that they do not get landfilled. That is something we absolutely don't want, because we do recognize that lithium could be a hazardous waste, so we don't want anything like that. It's not allowed. We don't want it. But also, there are people that are currently working on ways to figure out how do you recycle lithium back into a form that it could be used further, and lessen the environmental impact that way. The bottom line is this is all new, and we're this is an emerging technology that we're trying to come to terms with. There's going to be bumps along the way, and probably some negatives in the short term for some of this. But in recognizing that, I think that those kind of negatives are going to help inform better outcomes for the future, and get us to a place where we need to be. I know that's maybe more of a philosophical answer more than anything else.
Yeah,
but
the last question I have, Elliot, nuclear power plants. In removing ourselves away from coal, going to nuclear, you got nuclear waste you have to contend with.
Yep. And that's why IEC is an organization, part of that was one of the things that we had to kind of bite the bullet on in seizure, right? Nuclear power plants are something that we are not in favor of constructing new ones, certainly. And we had to contend with the fact that they supported a lot of jobs and they do provide a good chunk of power to Illinois. So we did wind up including money in there to keep them operating for the time being. That said, we are very cognizant of the impacts that those potentially could cause. Right now, under federal law, nuclear waste has to be stored on site at the facility that it's used at. It cannot be moved. That is because the original plan in the United States was to collect all nuclear waste and transport it to a place called Yucca Mountain, which is in the southwestern part of the United States, which I'm sure some of you know about. It's basically a multi-billion-dollar hole in the ground that is not currently being occupied by anything. The original plan was to store all of it there, but because it's not, the nuclear waste is stored on site in nuclear facilities in these big concrete casket things, which, they keep radiation out of the ground, but it's not a good feeling knowing that down the road that there is, some, uranium-235 that's slowly deteriorating in your backyard. So that's it's definitely something we don't want to see nuclear proliferate. I think the clean energy sector is something that should remain clean in its absolute form.
Okay, thank you very much.
I can tell you, I supported the nuclear subsidy, and the big reason why was when I asked at the Byron facility, what happens if we shut this down? And they said, well, we have to turn coal back on. And I was like, no, that takes us backwards. This is a bridge. We talk about nuclear as a bridge to where we're going.
Yep.
We have to have the infrastructure to do that. So I supported that piece of it.
Yeah, and we definitely appreciate that. Like from the environmental community, it was kind of tough for us in some ways. We've had a lot of groups that some of which like nuclear, some don't. We have to kind of thread the needle on some of those things as we talk through the legislative process. And it's part of, I think overall the testament of this bill.
Well, not to mention the economic impact, I mean, to the communities, over $20
Yeah.
million in just property taxes to the community, like to just unplug it just felt like the wrong thing to do. And
Yeah.
so, but now they know. I don't think they're going to get another one. So I think the message has been put out there that it's time to start making their exit plans of how they're going to do that. So
that's a great point. And as I was it's kind of saying, like, I think that's a really good testament to how strong this bill was. This thing was heavily negotiated, obviously. The amount of different groups at the table and meetings that took place and from all of these different sectors. I mean, I came in to IEC about 3 years ago when those conversations were still very much ongoing and were not fresh. And we've seen a lot over the last few years, and it's taken a long time for us to get where we're at, but we're happy with where we are. This was definitely a really big win for legislators and the environment, I think, in the end, and for, even, the nuclear facilities in terms of keeping them open, at least for the time being. So I think all in all, this was pretty much as good as anything we could ever get, I think.
Say, I just wanted to say, Jerry, Chevy Bolt, lower 30s right now, and that's without incentives. And I'm going, GM is going, they announced a few years ago, they're going all electric, and that's going to, if Build Back Better passes, they're giving incentives for that. I just heard this morning on CNN, not for Teslas, because of the union made and the made in the US. And I'm retired. That's the way I'm going personally. I like my Malibu. I'm going to go into a Bolt.
Well, to be honest with you, I like the new Mazda CX-5, even though it's not electric.
No, and that's actually one cool thing that reminds me too. Part of the EV tax credit bill that it passed is going to allow existing facilities like GM and some other car manufacturers in Illinois to convert their facilities to electric vehicle manufacturing, which is definitely a cool thing to keep even more in Illinois. Yeah, let me see. Geothermal energy alternatives. That is a good question. I am not sure. Geothermal, I think, is actually a really cool idea, but I'm not sure how much that plays into CEJA, but I can look into that and get you an answer for sure.
I do know in terms of like hybrid and looking at other forms of power, one thing that did come up was like localization. So depending on where you live in the state, what makes sense? If wind makes more sense in a certain area versus solar, then, there's ways to allow for that, more localization. But I wrote that question down as well. We can find out more. I know we're getting close to the end. We've gone a little over time, but I wanted to just make sure that everybody knows if you're working on a project, if there's something in the community like the Environmental Defenders Community Solar Project, let me know, reach out to me, because we can request funding with appropriations coming for the next session. They're already starting budget talks, believe it or not. So we'll be sitting through those, but let me know that. And then also, with the communities and the municipalities, we'll be working closely with those entities. So I think the ARPA dollars are still there. So there's ways to use that with infrastructure. There's a lot right now. This is a good time to be talking about those things, about money. So
thank you very much for this, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
We would also like to do a future one on solar for homes. I think that there's been a lot of questions about that specifically. And so we'll probably do something after the first of the year around that. So thank you for being here.
Okay.
I hope you all have a wonderful day. If you have any other questions, please. Elliot, did you add your email yet?
Yep, I just put my email in the chat a second ago, so definitely grab that before you get off if you want to shoot me any communications or just say hello or ask any random questions. I cover all the subject matter, so even if you have something about agriculture or an endangered species, let me know.
Thank you for being here, Elliot.
Of course, of course.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. We'll get you the recording link.